So what happened in the 2024 index and the 2025 index and report will be coming out very shortly, actually in the early April. So we'll see what's happened to, I can't say now, what has happened to Romania in the period since then. And obviously Romania has emerged from that kind of political crisis that occurred in 2024. So the new results will be out in a few weeks. But what happened in 2024, as we all know, well, first of all, in terms of the index, Romania's score in the end. So the index is, it's on a 0 to 10 scale. It's what we call a thick measure of democracy. So we're looking at 60 indicators across 5 categories, which is electoral process and pluralism, functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. Now, according to their index score, countries are then classified as one of 4 types of regime. So countries with a score above 8.0 are classified as full democracies. Countries with a score above 6.0 but less than 8 are classified as flawed democracies. And then countries between 4 and 6 are classified as hybrid regimes, and below that we have the authoritarian regimes. Now, what happened with Romania is that Romania was classified as a flawed democracy, together with, in that year, pretty much every single other country in Central and Eastern Europe. There were no, in that year, full democracies in Eastern Europe, actually, with the exception of Estonia and the Czech Republic, which came into the full democracy classification that year. But most countries in Eastern Europe are classified as flawed democracies. So what happened to Romania that year, in 2023, Romania had a score of 6.45, so it was a flawed democracy. In 2024, its score fell to 5.99, so literally just below the threshold to be classified as a flawed democracy. Now, the point is that there was something that happened that year, I think we're all aware of that tipped Romania over the edge into the hybrid regime category, because it's important to say that Romania had been on a downwards trajectory for some years, so falling down the rankings in terms of its score, and also in terms of the falling down the rankings of flawed democracies. And the reasons for that was, number one, very, very high levels of distrust in political institutions and political parties and politicians, which was getting worse year by year, so lack of trust. And again, this was a reflection of very widespread popular disaffection with the ruling parties, with the coalition governments that had been in power, and essentially with the main parties that had been in power since the collapse of communism and the fall of the Ceausescu regime. Other issues in Romania was high levels of corruption, lack of transparency, rule by decree, problems with judiciary, to some degree the kind of murky role of intelligence services. Now, that was the kind of overall kind of context, what had been happening in recent years. And then what happened in 2024 was that the presidential election was cancelled more or less in the middle of it, just before the second round of the election, in kind of unprecedented kind of intervention to cancel the election, when the 2 leading candidates in that election were not from the mainstream political parties, but these kind of insurgent parties on the right of the political spectrum. Now, in a democracy, there has to be a very high bar to cancel an election. So it requires to do that. It really demands absolute watertight evidence of attempts to subvert the democratic political process. Some very, very flagrant violations and so on. Now, at the time, and even subsequently, the evidence for that, I would say was not watertight. It was not convincing. And so that did affect the score in the electoral process and pluralism category for Romania. And that, on top of other scores were being downgraded that year as well, including in terms of trust, the trust indicators. There's quite a few of those, which is based on survey data. So it's not an analyst judgment at all. It's based on the survey data, which show absolutely, kind of rock bottom levels of trust of the of voters in the political system, in political parties, politicians, and so on. So that's the story. And obviously, since then, Romania has emerged from this political crisis, not to say that it's not facing political challenges, but it's emerged from the political crisis. The presidential election was held subsequently in 2025, and a new president was elected, a new government was formed. But a lot of the underlying issues are still there and to be addressed by the new government. And obviously, that's also made more difficult in the context of the kind of economic circumstances that Romania finds itself with, very high internal external deficits, the need for austerity measures and so on, and all in the context now of this geopolitical turbulence and a major war in the Middle East that is having very big consequences for everybody in Europe.